The honourable member for Edmonton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Or as I like to refer to it, Edmonton West, Edmonton Mall is the official name of my riding. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very pleased to rise to discuss the privilege motion we have before us on one of the many government green, specifically on the green slush fund, but on one of the many government environmental green scandals going on. Now, yes, I did say scandals. I'm sure a lot of you are wondering, scandals plural, and yes, just some that I've scanned through, there's 5 that we're looking at right now. There, of course, is the Green Slush Fund. We have the Environment Canada contribution audit scandal. We have the Net Zero accelerator scandal, and I'll get to those later. And, of course, we have the government with the carbon tax misleading Canadians, misleading this House repeatedly on the carbon tax. Now, many members, including the Prime Minister, have stood in this House and said the carbon tax was revenue neutral. In fact, we went back through Hansard and counted 37 times Liberals claimed the carbon tax was revenue neutral. The problem is the public accounts very clearly stated that $100 million was being diverted to other use. It's not revenue neutral, as proven by the public accounts. We also heard this government repeatedly saying more money would go back in the pockets of Canadians. And yet the Parliamentary Budget Officer has come out and stated very clearly, because of the effects on the economy, because of the knock-on costs as the tax goes through the system, Canadians are worse off. Albertans will be worse off over $750 per family because of the carbon tax. And of course, we have the Parks Canada scandal, which is under Environment Canada, where we have seen Jasper, the unfortunate issue of Jasper burning. I used to work for a company, we had a hotel in Jasper. Unfortunately, a lot of employees are now out of work, but also homeless. The government, of course, quickly blamed everything on climate change, when in fact we've seen documents come out that the government for years ignored warnings of a build-up of dead trees and bushes and leaves and other issues, other items due to the pine needle, and they ignored it all for political optics. I'm going to read a quote from a Access Information email that came out from Environment Canada. At what point do we make the organizational decision to cancel planned prescribed burns in Western Canada? As more and more media articles raise questions concerning drought conditions, public and political perception may become more important than the actual prescription windows. So here you have the government stating perhaps optics is more important than the actual fix that we know about, which is clearing the trees and prescribed burns. Despite so many things to talk about, there's only so much time I have, so I'm going to focus on 3. The first is, of course, the Green Slush Fund, which is Sustainable Development Technology Canada, which I'll from now on be calling SDTC for those following along at home. Now, Parliament has ordered the documents to be handed over, and the Liberals are covering up and refusing to hand over those documents, which makes you wonder, what are they hiding? What are they hiding that is so bad that the government is allowing weeks and weeks and weeks of their legislative agenda to be pushed aside for this debate? It makes you wonder, is that $400 million, taxpayers' dollars, were being funneled by Liberal insiders to other Liberal insiders? Is it that the Liberal appointees were ignoring conflict rules 88 times when funneling this money to Liberal insiders? Or perhaps the millions given to ineligible recipients? The Industry Canada contribution agreement, which is the contract basically that outlines who is eligible and also the rules to follow, clearly state that all conflicts from the board with STDC have to be reported to the minister. Now, we asked in committee a former Liberal Minister, Navdeep Bains, about this, and there was no answer. It got so bad, we actually are approaching a privilege motion in public accounts over his refusal to answer. Now, this is right in the contribution contract with Industry Canada. So Navdeep Bains or the current minister would have had to be advised of these 88 conflicts of interest that led to millions, hundreds of millions of taxpayers' money go to Liberal insiders or ineligible recipients. So the question is, did the ministers know and did nothing? Or were the ministers not informed? These documents will tell us, but the Liberals will not. And I have to wonder, are these documents further implicating the Minister of Environment? Of course, the same minister who's financially involved in Capital Cycle, or Cycle Capital, I apologize, the same Cycle Capital, which is a recipient of tens of millions of dollars of the Green Slush Fund. Of course, the founding member of Cycle Capital, of course, was on the board of the STDC. Now, this founding member, the minister's partner, Andrea Lee Smitho, was in public accounts, and we asked her about these conflicts. But she noted that she and the minister barely made any money off of some of these grants. And you think about it, like, at what point does it become okay for corruption if we barely made any money? Are we setting the new bar that it's okay to be corrupt as long as you barely make any money?
Good point.
That is a question that could be answered by the documents and be answered by this government, but we're not. Now, we further heard from a senior bureaucrat from the Privy Council. Now, the Privy Council, of course, is the Prime Minister's department in informal terms, but it's the department that serves the Prime Minister. This senior bureaucrat from the Privy Council, when we asked about why she's not turned over documents as ordered by Parliament, said that she was refusing to release the documents ordered until she received permission from the former head of the board of the STDC, Annette Verschuren. Now, this is the same Annette Verschuren who was found guilty by the Ethics Commissioner for violating conflict of interest agreements with STDC grants. So here we have the Prime Minister's department stating they need the permission from someone found guilty of violating the ethics code before they will actually hand over the unredacted documents that Parliament has ordered. Now, we have the Liberal appointed chair who is sending taxpayers' dollars to her own company. And again, the government will not turn over the documents until they receive permission from her for privacy reasons. Now, keep in mind, this is also the hand-picked chair of Liberal Minister Navdeep Bains, who worked outside of the application process, who reached out and chose her after the application process for the role had closed. And here we have the Liberal government blocking access. I want to move on to the next green scandal, number 2, the net zero accelerator. Now, like the expensive Liberal housing accelerator that doesn't actually build houses, the net zero accelerator doesn't actually reduce emissions. The Environment Commissioner reported that $8 billion for programs were paid out to ineligible companies, most with no plan to actually reduce emissions. The actual cost to Canadians taxpayers per ton of reduced emissions was $523. You think about that. Current carbon tax is working its way up to about $170. Government paid $523 per ton of reduced emissions. Commissioner commented in his report that the money was given out was not part of any coherent policy on decarbonization. Not a coherent policy. Of course, it's only $8 billion between friends. He also commented the vast majority of the projects have no written commitment to reduce precise amount of emissions. If only life was so easy that we could just give out $8 billion without telling the government what you were going to do with it or what you were going to achieve. Now, companies awarded billions hadn't even completed feasibility studies on how they were actually going to reduce emissions. the department raided other funding programs in order to top up funding to the net zero accelerator because so much money had been committed to these companies that weren't eligible and hadn't provided information on how they're going to reduce emissions. Funding was approved before the Liberals even did due diligence on the applications. Now, who are some of these companies so deserving of the corporate welfare from taxpayers, you ask? Well, one of them is a company called Geely, or perhaps Geely, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but it's G-E-E-L-Y. Now, this is a China-owned car company that builds EVs with forced Uyghur labor. And yes, Canadian taxpayers, through our friends with the Liberal government, are giving them corporate welfare for electric vehicles made in China by forced labor to be brought into the Canadian market. But guess what? This is the same car company that will now be paying 100% higher tariffs on the cars built, subsidized by Canadians using forced labor brought into Canada. But it gets worse. And you wonder, how could it get worse? The Ukrainian National Agency for Prevention of Corruption states that Geely is a sponsor of war. It continues to help fund the Russian economy by paying tax, by continuing to do business in Russia, paying taxes in Russia. So we have an independent Ukrainian agency noting that this company is a sponsor of war, but what the heck, let's give them taxpayers' money anyways. Now, of course, we have Stellantis, which is worth $55 billion market cap. Got $500 million more on top of all the money they received for the battery plants. General Motors, worth $70 billion, got $100 million at taxpayers' corporate welfare. Pratt & Whitney, $222 billion, worth almost $250 billion, got $60 million. All in all, $8 billion given out to companies worth over $900 billion. And again, we go back to what the Environment Commissioner said. Money was given out without due diligence, without proof that emissions would be reduced. Environment Commissioner even stated that the program didn't even help the largest emitters in the country. The low-hanging fruit where we could get the most bang from the buck, we heard the Prime Minister today state they were going to go after the oil and gas industry because they were the largest emitters, so they would have the easiest path to reduce emissions. So here we have the Environment Commissioner noting this same government gave out $8 billion of corporate welfare, but didn't even target the largest emitters where we get the most bang for the buck. Funny part of the report, this is page 8 for those following at home, Environment Commissioner notes that government stated that any project above $50 million requires Treasury Board approval, concurrence letters from ministers and other concerned departments, and cabinet approval, but it can be fast-tracked with a letter through the Prime Minister. So here we have, again, millions, billions given out to companies that weren't eligible, but it would have had gone through Treasury Board and the Minister. So here we have the Treasury Board not doing the job, the Minister's not doing the job. You'd think somewhere along the lines someone would have said, oh, $100 million to General Motors, which is worth $70 billion. Are you sure? Have they done the due diligence? Are they doing the right thing? No. In fact, they even had a way to skirt the rules by you could fast-tracking this money by going right to the Prime Minister. I actually read in the report the Environment Commissioner stated due diligence wasn't done. Companies received money, funding, even before the project was properly vetted. How much money was given out to from taxpayers being fast-tracked for the Prime Minister so they could have optics instead of actual action on the environment? And now I get to the last scandal I want to talk about tonight, the Environment Canada contribution audit scandal. Now, this is right from Environment Canada. The auditor, they have internal auditors, put out a report noting problems with the governance and weak conflict of interest rules, where have we heard that before, and weak guidelines on cash management for the grants and contribution given out by Environment Canada. Now, Environment Canada, you think would be about helping the environment, right? You'd be wrong if you thought that when you look through the report. So where did taxpayers' money go from Environment Canada? I'll give you some great examples. The iron ore company, which owns Rio Tinto, got $18 million. Now, today we had visitors from juvenile diabetes come to the house or come to our offices. They were looking for $15 million of funding over 4 years. They believe that they would have a medical breakthrough to cure type 1 diabetes. They're that close. They just need $15 million for 4 years. But where are we spending the money? $18 million for Rio Tinto. Oh, and by the way, the same Rio Tinto that got fined $500,000 by the Quebec government for dumping harmful substances into the Saguenay River. Environment Canada rewarding people who have been fined for polluting. Glencore, worth $53 billion, got $10 million of corporate welfare. This is after pleading guilty to corruption charges, and they had to pay $1.5 billion settlement to the U.S. government, but they had $10 million for that fine from Canada. Lafarge got $14 million. Guess what Lafarge got in trouble for and what they did with some of that money? They got fined for paying ISIS. Think about that. Some of the worst atrocities we've seen done by the terrorists and ISIS, funded by Lafarge, ordered by the U.S. government to pay $780 million penalty, and they're still operating in Syria right now, by the way. But taxpayers are helping this company through Environment Canada. Copper Mountain got $3 million, even though their head of security pled guilty to murdering Indigenous activists. And we're rewarding that. Environment Canada. Indigenous activists fighting for the environment, murdered by the company, but this Liberal government, Environment Canada, with their radical environment minister, sending them corporate welfare. Stellantis, here they are again, $2.5 million. By the way, Stellantis was also fined for emissions cheating in Europe. So again, we have Environment Canada giving corporate welfare to a company that was fined for cheating on the environment rules in Europe. Taxpayers paying their fine, basically. Another one, Quadrille Property Group, $2.5 million. This company's been blacklisted in the U.S. for investments in companies in China using forced labor. Owens Corning, $2.5 million taxpayers' money through Environment Canada. Fined for hazardous waste violations. So here we have another big company helping destroying the environment, but the government giving taxpayers money to. One of my favorite, Cornell University, $15 billion endowment fund that they have, but the Environment Canada is funding students in a foreign university instead of funding here. Now, I want to get back to the issue at hand, which is the issue the government will not hand over the documents. Now, Michelle Bedard, who is the law clerk, when appearing in both public accounts and OGO, made this statement: there's no limit to the right of the House of Commons and any of its committees to order the production of documents, providing the documents are available in paper or electronic form and are here in Canada. And this is the crux of the issue. It's very clear Parliament has the right to order these documents. Committee has demanded them. Parliament has demanded them. Yes. This government has given up 4 or 5 weeks of its legislative agenda to prevent these documents coming out. We have to ask, what are they hiding? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.